and welcome to another episode of Signatures with Maria. We're blessed today to have with us none other than Ben Smith. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Maria.
So, Ben, tell me, how did you end up in Columbus? Tell me your story.
Well, I grew up in Harris County, which is the county just north of here.
Right.
My dad was a pulpwood dealer for a paper mill. My mother worked at Callaway Gardens in the accounting office for 38 years.
Oh, wow.
And I worked there during the summer months. And all.
Naturally.
And so everybody worked at Callaway
Everybody
Gardens.
worked at Callaway.
But Columbus was always town for
right.
us. We had to come to Columbus for everything. And I spent most Saturday mornings as a young child with my mother at Curvin's.
Okay.
Walking up and down the aisles in downtown Columbus. And so Columbus was orientation for me. And after I graduated from college,
All right.
I came to Columbus and found a job and moved here. So yeah, I didn't move very far from home, just 20 miles from home.
Okay. So was it different for you? You went away to college?
I did. I went to a junior college down in South Georgia named Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College for 2 years, and then I transferred to the University of Georgia and graduated for there in forestry.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then I spent my whole career in the peanut business.
I was about to say, was that your intention when you left home?
No, I really, my dad was in the forestry business as a pulpwood dealer, and I ran all of his crews during the summertime and and worked on the bulldozers and the skidders and all.
So you've done a little bit of it all, huh?
So when I got to college, I had to declare a major.
You had to declare a major. Imagine that.
I thought, well, why not? So I just declared forestry, but I was in the graduation line at the University of Georgia, and I said to the guy next to me, I've got to get serious about what to major in.
Okay, because it's that time now.
Yep.
And so you ended up back here, and did you have a plan?
Well, my plan was to just find a job, and I really wanted a job at the banks. I wanted one of those intern jobs, and I interviewed with several banks, and nothing developed.
Really?
Because that was right at the end of the Vietnam War, and a lot of kids were coming home that had been promised jobs, and when they came home, they got them. And I wound up interviewing at Tom's Foods, or at that time it was Tom Houston, a peanut company here in Columbus. And they wound up offering me a job in the industrial engineering department. In those days, they didn't care what your major was in as long as you had a college degree.
A college degree.
And so I really wasn't too interested in it. And I had decided that I just really didn't want to go into that area. And I started home. I got down to Catawba, Georgia.
Where is that exactly?
It's between here and Hamilton. It's about 10 miles or so on US 27.
All right.
I got to Catawba, Georgia, and God said to me, Ben, you prayed for a job. I gave you one.
A job.
Now you got to take it. So I stopped at a payphone. No such thing as cell phones.
I know, I remember. I remember.
And I stopped at a payphone, and I called Tom's back and said, I'll take the job. And I did, and worked for a couple of years in the industrial engineering division and learned a lot of stuff.
All right.
And then an opportunity became available in the peanut shelling arena, and I became assistant manager of shelling for the shelling operation. Tom's was unique in that it bought peanuts from the farmer and shelled them itself rather than buying shell peanuts from a commercial sheller who only bought from the farmer. So we actually bought peanuts from the farmer and shelled them ourselves here in Columbus.
Well, let me stop you. Can we go back a little bit? I want to kind of hone in on what God told you.
Yeah. Well, I worked for a year for my dad when I got out of college.
Okay.
In the forestry business, and I just didn't feel fulfilled, and so in my prayer life was to come to Columbus and see if God would open up opportunity to be in Columbus. Everybody in my era, they wanted to get as far away from home as they could when they graduated from college.
I think that's still happening.
And I was just not interested in that. I didn't care about going to California.
Okay.
So I wanted to stay in Georgia. So and so I came down and I interviewed several people in Columbus. Now, I forgot to tell you that one of the things, while I was working for my dad, I wound up interviewing and receiving a part-time job as youth director at First Baptist Church.
Okay, because I wanted to stop you to find out, when were you praying? Were you praying in your 20s? And did you grow up in the church, or did you receive Christ at what point in this time?
I did. I grew up in the church. My mom and dad were fabulous Christians and led me through that experience. I joined the church and was baptized at about 10 or 12 years old.
Wow.
Then at 14, I attended my last year. I was eligible to attend the RA camps. RA was Royal Ambassadors.
All right.
And we had a camp up in Harris County. They held the camp up in Harris County. And I had learned how to play the bugle. That's the only thing I could play was the bugle. And I learned how to play taps and reveille, and so I was the bugle boy.
Oh.
And I was 14 was the last year you could go, so I was the oldest crowd there, and was really enjoying being cool man on campus.
Cool man.
And a preacher came. We had Vespers every night. A preacher came, and he I don't remember who came. I don't remember anything about his sermon, but God's Holy Spirit convicted me in that service. I left it. I did not go forward.
Okay.
But I did go out in the woods there and sat on the stump, and I confessed my sins. God gave me, I remember 2 of them. I remember there were 3 sins that he just brought to my mind.
Okay.
And I'm sure I had a lot more than that. But those were the ones
that needed to be highlighted.
That God brought to my mind. So I confessed them.
Wow.
And after that, I left that stump, and I went back to the assembly, found my pastor, and told him what I'd done. And he said, confession is the first step of salvation, but you need to give your life to the Lord. And so I prayed to receive Christ at 14. In my high school years, there wasn't much challenge to my Christian faith.
Okay. That's different now, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
And I went to... At Abraham Baldwin, I got engaged in the Baptist Student Union.
Okay.
And then again at the University of Georgia, I was in the leadership of the Baptist Student Union. And
you've been a leader all your life almost.
Well, that was my group. And
right.
so I wasn't in a fraternity, but that was a time in my life when I grew exponentially.
In your faith?
Religiously, from my spiritual faith.
Okay.
I graduated from Georgia in 67, 51 years ago this June.
I was about to say that. I was born in 67, so go ahead. Oh, wow.
And I had a roommate named Ron Collins, who ultimately had a girlfriend named Carol Hall.
All right.
And they ultimately got married, and I was in their wedding.
Okay.
And went back up to Georgia after I had graduated, about a year later or so, to just be with old friends and go to some fellowships with them. And Carol Collins, Hall Collins, had a younger than she was, cousin that was at the University of Georgia. That she came in the fall of the year I graduated. She came that following fall, named Emily Barnhill.
All right.
And so she wanted me to meet her cousin. And
meet the cousin.
I went over and picked her up at the dorm, and we went to a little get together that Ron and Carol was sponsoring. Then after that, we had coffee, and I began to have some butterflies in my.
You was feeling kind of sweet on her, huh?
Ultimately, we
what a beautiful story.
We dated, and then she graduated in 72.
All right.
And we married in June of 72, just 3 or 4 weeks after she graduated.
Wow.
And so.
Because you were well already into something by then.
Yeah, I had been working for 2, 3 years. By the time we got married, I'd been working for 3 years.
3 years,
at times.
So that makes sense.
And so I was her older man.
Ooh, listen now. Okay, all right. This is good. So let me guess. How many years has it been now since you two have been together?
In June, it'll be 47.
Wow. What a blessing.
It has been sweet.
To be married to the same person.
Yep. Same person, and it grows, and it's growing every day.
That's beautiful.
It's work.
Oh, no. I tell people all the time, if you want to be married and if you want to stay married, it is work, and you've got to work it. So that's good. But if you hang in there, it'll
sweet.
work.
It's sweet.
It'll work. It'll work. Okay. So now you're working at your job. Your sweetie's graduated, and how did you find out whether or not she knew the Lord herself?
Well, when I was courting, when I was dating her.
That's okay. Dating, courting, that's what they used to call it. I understand.
Dating her, she was really active. Well, Carol Hall Collins,
Right.
Told me that she was a Christian,
believer.
a believer. And so, and when we met, that was really true. She played the piano for the choir at the church that Ron Collins, my roommate at that time, had been music director. So we had all those connections.
You had a lot of things in common.
So, and she, in fact, her junior year, between her junior and senior years, she was a summer missionary to Israel.
Wow.
And then when she came home from that summer mission experience, is when I asked her to marry me.
Wow. Do you think she was expecting it?
Well, I think so. We've
You
been
hope so, anyway.
communicating, and I had laid out some. It's interesting because I'd laid out some ideas that she would know by virtue of some questions I was asking, whether she'd received the answer or not. I picked her up at the airport in Atlanta, and we drove from Atlanta to Moultrie, Georgia.
I know where that is.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that's her home, or out on a farm from Moultrie. And on the way down there, I asked her, did you receive the communication where I talked about so-and-so? And she said, yes. And I said, well, what did you think about it? Which should have precipitated, I think I want to marry you.
Okay.
But she said, I thought it was nice. So we get.
What do you get? What do you start to think when you're like, I want to marry you, but you're saying, well, that's nice.
So we get to Moultrie, and I have to come back to Columbus that Friday night because I have to work Saturday morning. It's peanut harvest season.
Oh,
and
boy.
so we were receiving peanuts, and my boss said I had to be back there to receive peanuts. So I on the way back home, on the way back to Columbus, I said, you know, that little girl has taken me for a ride, and I am just embarrassed. And then God said to me, Smith, if you love her, it doesn't make any difference how she responds.
Ooh.
You still love her.
Ooh,
And so on the
I
way
like that.
back driving, I said, I'm going to go back down there tomorrow night, and I'm going to ask her the question, and I'm going to say, I'm just going to ask it one time, and if you say no, then that's fine, we'll move on.
Wow.
So we did. Her mother was in the hospital. She had cancer. She was in the hospital.
Wow.
We were sitting in her house, about ready to go to visit her mom. I sat her down on the couch. They had a black and white TV that could receive 3 channels from Albany and Tallahassee. I cut the TV off, and I sat down, and
because this was important, so you got to turn the TV off. Okay.
Turn it off, and I said, Emily, I'm going to ask you this one time, and then I won't say it anymore.
Oh, wow.
But I want to know if you will marry me. To which she responded, yes, and jumped up and hugged my neck.
Oh.
And she said, I didn't want to go through life with me having asked you to marry me. I wanted you to ask me.
So she was ready.
Yes, she was ready. But she didn't want to respond to that innuendo. She wanted to respond to us.
She wanted you to ask her.
So, and she's been a very strong partner spiritually in our marriage as well.
That's
so
wonderful.
Yep.
So let's come up about 15, 20 years. Give us what you think between you and Emily. What do you think that God has done that ultimately changed the both of your lives as you became older?
Well, first of all, we had 2 children.
Okay, that would make a difference.
And just the evangelization of those children, sharing the Lord with those children and seeing them come to know the Lord was important. And then not too long after our marriage, Emily came up with a wonderful process that has been so helpful to us spiritually.
Okay.
That once a week, we have a scheduled time that we sit down and we talk. And when things come up, as they invariably will,
Yes, they will.
that we have conflicts on, most of the time they'll come up at times when you're on the way to church or you're late at night. Those are not the best emotional times to deal with those things.
No.
So Emily's idea, and this was her idea, she said, let's put them in a drawer. And let's set aside a time once a week that we sit down and we bring those things out of the drawer when we are focused on working on our marriage, and we work on them rather than at the time when we are so least available to work on them emotionally.
Okay. Okay.
And so that's been,
I love this.
That's
This
been
is awesome.
that's been a wonderful thing in our marriage, because, for instance, you can have a disagreement.
Absolutely.
And without allowing that disagreement to just fester and fester until it blows out of perspective, you put it in a drawer. We're going to deal with it. We're going to deal with it next Tuesday, sometimes next Tuesday, 9 or 10 o'clock, whenever we have it on our schedule. And then we work toward, that becomes a scheduled event, so to speak, not necessarily the time of the day.
But it is important.
But it is sometimes during that day, we know we've got to find the time. And we may move it around in order to accommodate the schedule.
Right.
But we know on Tuesdays we're going to sit down and talk.
And we're going to have a discussion.
And the first thing we do is we say, what's in your drawer? We take turns. And we bring out one or two. Sometimes they're just praises. They're just thanks.
Wow.
And then, but they also are an opportunity to bring out the real tough things. That, and we're prepared to talk about them without the emotional strain of the timing or the events that they occur in. And
I love that.
That's been one of the most important things. And,
so you believe that the Lord gave that to her?
Oh, I do.
Because it's been so successful.
She is a strong spiritual partner.
Wow.
With me. So.
I'm so sorry I didn't invite her to come with you.
Well, she was coming, and she is off with a friend in ministry right now.
Okay, so she's doing what she does.
She didn't make it back in time. But
that's okay. Wow, that's so powerful. I think I want to use that, Ben. I mean, when I get a husband, I think I might want to use that. Because it makes, I've heard of, okay, somebody gets upset and the other person, and this is not just husband and wife, but this is anyone, but I'm not going to have a discussion with you at this moment because right now I'm angry. And so I've heard of tabling it and then coming back to it when everybody's calm, the emotions have died down. But the strategicness of we're going to put it in a drawer and we'll pull it out later, I think that's fantastic.
Not just later, but a
specific
time later. And sometimes, there are no issues.
It's just all good stuff.
It's just a good discussion.
Oh, I would love that.
And then we have prayer together, and then we look at our calendars at that same time. Those are the three things that we do.
Okay.
We look at those issues if there are any. And sometimes, some weeks, there's just, I want to just talk about how good it was to do something last week with you or something. So it's not always.
And it's not always an issue, but it's always a concern. Because whether it's a good concern or a bad concern.
And it's a specific time.
I love that.
Wow. It's usually on Tuesdays unless we have to purposely move it because of something on our calendar.
An event or something, okay.
And that happens occasionally. We're not home. We're off traveling or something. And so we have to move it to Wednesday.
Wow.
Sort of thing.
Okay, you have really blessed me with that one because I'm thinking now, I'm not a minister necessarily, but I actually performed an American-style wedding for some Vietnamese friends of mine. And they said, Maria, we know that you're religious, is what they said. And I thought it was cute. And we're going to have our regular ceremony, the Vietnamese way, which is like a week long. It's so beautiful. And they dress up and they do a whole lot of wonderful things. But I had befriended this young girl when she was like 14. And So when she was about to get married, I remember being in my apartment alone in Atlanta, and the phone rang, and I saw it was her. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, she's getting married. Because she would only call me now when it was an event of some sort. And so I said, oh. So I picked up and I said, hi, TT, and how's everything? And she was like, oh, everything's good. Long story short, she was calling to ask me, not only to tell me she was getting married, but to also ask me if I would be the officiator of the ceremony. I'm thinking, I said, sweetie, I'm not a minister like that. I have no license or anything. She said, oh, it's okay. That's not what we really need from you. We wrote our own vows. We just want you to put together that American wedding for us because we'll already be officially married. Mm-hmm. But for all of our American friends, Daniel and I want you to just go through the motions, if you will. And I said, okay. Well, me being the Christian that I am, it's a little bit more than going through a motion. So it just reminded me that for the ceremony, I had asked God, I said, now they're not necessarily Christians, but I want to come up with something that will leave an impact of who you are. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't think of anything. I said, you have to give me something that would be significant. And I'm telling you, it reminded me so much of this when you talked about your wife. So I went searching in Hallmark store, and I found I was looking for a locked box, something that would lock with a key, but I couldn't find one. But I went in the Hallmark store and I found this cute little jewelry box. And he told me, he said, while you're up there, you can say a few things, but while you're up there, let them go ahead and give because she had told me, we're writing our own vows. I said, okay, good, that's fine. He said, take those vows when they're done and have them place them in that box. And what I gave them very specific instructions. I said, because you've never been married, and I have. I said, this is what you are to do. Those moments and those nights when you are mad at each other and you can hardly stand each other, yeah. I said, keep this box right on your dresser at the foot of your bed, yeah. And go and unlock it, pry it open, and read those vows back to each other. Because they were like, both of them were in tears because they wrote such beautiful vows. Yeah. Actually, they kind of had me crying too. But the point was, I said, because I think what happens when people go to the altar, they forget what they've said to each other. And I don't know if there was a dry eye in there, because that was straight from God. But remind yourself why you got married in the first place. Because when you're saying things at the altar, that's one thing. But 20 years later, oh boy, and I don't like the way your shoes look, and I don't like the way your socks smell.
All my jokes used to be funny. And my car was cool.
But
and
now,
I dressed handsomely.
Listen, and you probably even had more hair on top of your head.
Much more hair.
So I think that is so significant, that God would give that to your wife, and it blessed your whole family.
It did.
It blessed your whole family. I'm so excited. So is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience about even just who God is to you, and how has he significantly changed your entire life?
Well, he is the God of creation.
Absolutely.
And I come back to that so often, because that's, you got to start with the fact that God is the God of creation. And he's the God of judgment.
Absolutely.
But in that context, though, he's the God of mercy. Oh. And God couldn't save man from heaven.
Nope.
He was born of a woman, and that's significant, because that put him in the same status and availability to sin as me.
Right.
And he didn't.
And he didn't.
And he paid the penalty as if I did. And that concept has been such a driving force in me. I'm retired now, and I have lots of time on my hand, and I feel called to teach God's Word. Amen. And I teach Bible study on Sunday mornings at First Baptist.
Okay.
And that is what one of my focuses. That's my activity during the week, is preparing for that. And it's a privilege to spend the time it takes to study God's Word.
To even study, to be
to know
able to
God's
talk a
Word.
few moments in front of other people.
And so that's how God's He blessed me with a wonderful career.
Yes.
And I was greatly appreciative of that. I was able to stay in Columbus the whole time.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get transferred because all of our peanut manufacturing is all in Columbus, and so I was able to stay here during the time because I managed the peanut operation eventually, the whole operation, in the manufacturing plant as well. And so I was grateful for that. And having retired here, then that's been a wonderful opportunity, and that's what I feel called right now to do.
So, when you are thinking about who God is and you're studying, do me a favor, look in the camera and say to everyone that's watching what you believe is the best thing for them when it comes to the Lord.
Well, I think that first of all, we got to understand, kind of like I did on the stump, that I'm not worthy, totally unworthy, but God is. Through the person of Jesus Christ, God Himself came to earth, was tempted like as me, yet without sin, and then paid that penalty, which was death, for my sins. And that's the basis of my whole Christian walk.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today, Ben.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, you have really blessed me with that wife story. I don't know. I think that's the thing that's going to stay with me the longest. But because I honor marriage.
Thank you.
I honor marriage, and I love. My parents were married for 61 years, and then my dad went to be home with the Lord. And I said, if anybody can stay married to anyone, 60 years, you're doing something.
So were mine.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. So thank you so much for sharing your story, your life, and how you believe God has called you to ministry of teaching.
Thank you.
So with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in to another segment of Signatures with Maria. Be blessed, and as I always say, stay with God and be good to yourself as well as others.